Imagine the year 1893. Chicago. The World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition, where 27 million people gathered to see electric lighting, Ferris's first Ferris wheel, and dozens of other wonders of the new century. It is a hot August. It smells of burnt sugar, horse manure, and humid lake air from Michigan. Somewhere in the Food Innovation Pavilion stands a table. On the table are jars. Inside is something brown, thick, with a sharp, nutty smell. Visitors cautiously take small spoons. Taste it. Freeze. This is not butter and not jam in the usual sense. This is something completely different. This is a paste. Nobody at that exhibition thought they were looking at the future. Nobody thought that after 130 years this thick brown mass would be sold for an amount of $8 billion a year in the United States alone. Nobody thought about the wars it survived, about the bans that were imposed on it, about the slave labor that stands behind its history. And certainly nobody thought that the inventor whose name is most often linked with peanut butter did not actually invent it. That is what we are talking about today. About a product that everyone knows and almost nobody really knows. Let us start with the legend. Because without it, it is impossible. George Washington Carver. Scientist, agronomist, former slave, professor at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. A man who developed more than 300 ways to use peanuts, from paint to cosmetics, from ink to soap. Legend has it, he was the one who invented peanut butter. It has entered American culture so firmly that it is repeated in school textbooks, in children's encyclopedias, in popular articles. Carver is a peanut genius. Carver gave the world this product. Historians will say that this is a legend. Or, more precisely, that this is a myth with a real hero who was credited with someone else's invention. But there is truth in it. And it is much more interesting than the myth itself. The peanut is an ancient plant. Archaeobotanists found its traces in burials of the pre-Inca culture on the territory of modern Peru, dated to approximately 7600 BC. 9,500 years ago, people were already growing it, eating it, and, apparently, praying to it. In tombs in northern Peru, clay vessels in the shape of peanut pods were found. Peanuts were the food of the dead, food placed next to a person so that he would not starve in the afterlife. Think about it. 9,000 years ago, someone decided that peanuts were important enough to take with them into eternity. The Aztecs made a paste out of it. The Maya, too. Long before Spanish conquistadors first set foot on the land of the New World, the indigenous inhabitants of South America already knew that if you grind peanuts into powder and add a little moisture, you get something thick, nutritious, and very tasty. This was peanut paste. Not industrial. Not stabilized. But by principle, that very same thing. And here the legend comes into force again, because it is precisely in this gap between the ancient paste of the Aztecs and a modern jar from the supermarket that all the confusion with the inventors lives. The Spaniards brought peanuts to Europe in the 16th century, but Europe treated them cold-shouldered. It was the food of the poor, the food of slaves. Portuguese and Spanish slave traders realized that peanuts, cheap, nutritious, long-lasting, were ideal for supplying living cargo on ships. That was how the peanut ended up in West Africa. And from there, together with enslaved Africans, it returned back to the New World. Only now onto the plantations of the southern states. This is an important detail, and a dark one. Peanuts in North America are a product of the slave trade. Not metaphorically. Literally. They were cultivated by slaves. They were eaten by slaves. Peanut butter, in a rough, simple form, was prepared on plantations long before any doctor in Canada thought to patent it. When, after the Civil War, freed black farmers in the American South began actively growing peanuts as an alternative crop in place of cotton, it was not accidental. They knew peanuts. They had grown up alongside them. They were part of their culture long before white farmers even became interested in this plant. This is precisely why Carver's story is so important. Not because he invented peanut butter, but because he did something else, and this something else is, perhaps, more important. But let us return to the paste, to its official industrial birth. 1884. Canada. Marcellus Edson, a physician from Quebec, receives a patent for a method of grinding roasted peanuts into a paste, as a nutritious product for people with bad teeth. I like this detail. The first patented peanut butter is a dietary product for the toothless, not a soldier's ration, not a children's breakfast. Therapeutic nutrition. 1895. John Harvey Kellogg. Yes, that very same Kellogg who would later come up with cornflakes, patents his own method of making peanut butter. He, too, sees in it primarily a medical product. Kellogg was a committed vegetarian and ran a sanatorium in Battle Creek, Michigan, where he treated wealthy patients with diet, enemas, and grain food. Peanut butter in his worldview is a meat substitute, a source of protein without slaughter. He serves it to patients who cannot chew. It is a success. And now, the Chicago exhibition of 1893. There, a certain John Lambert demonstrates peanut butter. He is not a doctor. He is an entrepreneur. And he is the first to realize that this is not medicine. This is food. Someone opened a shop. Lambert begins production. In 1896, he sells the first machine for the industrial grinding of peanuts into paste. In parallel, in St. Louis, a certain Ambrose Straub, again at an exhibition, this time in 1904, demonstrates peanut butter as a cheap meat substitute for the poor. Straub even developed a machine to prepare it right on the spot. People stand in line. Taste it. Buy it. But the product still remains niche. Expensive. Unreliable. The paste separates. The fat floats to the top. The mass sours. And right here appears the man, without whom peanut butter in the form you know it simply would not exist. Joseph Rosefield. 1922. California. Rosefield discovers that if peanut butter is subjected to partial hydrogenation, that is, treated with hydrogen under high pressure, the product stops separating. It becomes smooth. Stable. It does not spoil for months. Rosefield patents the process, sells a license to the E.K. Pond Company, which, by the way, soon renames itself Peter Pan, and then, when the contract expires, creates his own brand. Skippy. That very Skippy that today is sold in 60 countries around the world. Rosefield made peanut butter a mass product. He did not invent it, but he scaled it. And that, to be honest, is sometimes more important. And now, Carver. George Washington Carver was born into slavery, presumably around 1864, in the state of Missouri. He did not remember his father. His mother was kidnapped by slave traders when he was a few weeks old. He grew up in the house of his former masters, Moses and Susan Carver, who, to their credit, gave him an education. In 1896, Booker T. Washington invited him to head the Department of Agriculture at the Tuskegee Institute. And here is what Carver saw there. The South after the Civil War. Land exhausted by cotton. Farmers, former slaves, and their children in poverty. Crop yields were falling. The soil was dead. Carver proposed a simple solution. Rotate crops. Plant peanuts. Peanuts fix nitrogen from the air and return it to the soil. After peanuts, the land lives again. This was agronomically brilliant. But there was a problem. The farmers listened. They planted peanuts. Peanut yields grew. But a market for peanuts did not exist. Then Carver sat down in the laboratory and began coming up with uses. 300 ways to use peanuts. Peanut butter is on this list too, but not as an invention, as a popularization. Carver did not patent peanut butter. He fundamentally refused to patent his developments, believing that knowledge should belong to everyone. He made booklets, free, written in simple language, and distributed them to farmers. Peanut butter recipes. Ways to use it in cooking. Storage tips. This was not a business. This was a mission. And the myth of Carver as the inventor of peanut butter was born precisely out of this mission. Because he so passionately promoted the peanut, spoke so convincingly about its possibilities, that people decided. Since he knows so much about it, it means he invented it. This is unfair to the real inventors. But it is in its own way fair to Carver, because what he did is more important than any patent. He saved the economy of an entire region. Literally. But this story has a price, and it is not small. The growth of peanut popularity in the United States in the early 20th century pushed the expansion of plantations. Peanuts were grown mainly in the southern states, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, North Carolina. Labor on these farms in the post-war era formally became free. But in reality, the system of sharecropping kept former slaves and their descendants in conditions little different from slavery in their economic nature. A farmer works on land that does not belong to him, gives away half of the harvest, takes a loan from that same landowner. The debt never decreases. The circle is closed. In parallel, on the global market, the largest producers of peanuts today, China, India, Nigeria, Senegal, Sudan. In a number of regions of West Africa and South Asia, child labor is still used on peanut plantations. Labor rights organizations recorded this as recently as in reports from the 2010s. Your jar of peanut butter from the supermarket can have a very long shadow. This does not mean one must give up peanut butter. It means one needs to know where it comes from. Now about the wars. Because without wars, the history of peanut butter is incomplete. The First World War. The USA declares meat a strategic resource. The Food Administration, under the leadership of Herbert Hoover, the future president, urges Americans to eat less meat and more plant protein. Peanut butter finds itself in military rations. Soldiers take it to France along with canned food and hardtack. Having returned home, they bring the habit with them. The Second World War. History repeats itself, only on a larger scale. The American Army purchases peanut butter by the millions of pounds. By 1944, production in the USA reaches record volumes. Soldiers eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, PB&J. This combination becomes so firmly ingrained in military life that after the war it returns home along with the veterans. And already in the 1950s, PB&J is a standard school lunch across the entire country. War created a tradition. And tradition created an industry. By 1958, Americans consume about 170 million kilograms of peanut butter a year. That is roughly a kilogram per person. The average American eats about 3 kilograms of peanut butter a year today. A senator from Georgia in the 1960s once said in jest, "Peanut butter is the answer to all questions." He was a senator from the peanut state. But still. And now about the ban. Because there was a ban too. Only an unusual one. It was not the government that tried to ban peanut butter. It was schools that tried to eliminate it. In the 2000s, a massive exodus of peanut butter from school cafeterias began in the USA. The reason? The growth of peanut allergies among children. The statistics are indeed alarming. According to the organization Food Allergy Research and Education, from 1997 to 2008, the prevalence of peanut allergy among children tripled. By the 2010s, hundreds of school districts had introduced a total ban on peanut products in schools. Some states discussed legislative bans. Parents of children with allergies demanded protection. Parents of children without allergies demanded the return of peanut butter sandwiches. Peanut butter manufacturers lobbied for the softening of restrictions. Scientists argued about the causes of the allergy increase. The ban failed. Not legally. Many schools still hold it in force to this day. But culturally, peanut butter went nowhere. Sales did not drop. New formats, peanut bars, peanut powders, peanut snacks, covered markets where the direct product turned out to be restricted. The product won again. And here is an interesting turn with science. Because the story with allergies is much more complex than it seems. In 2015, in the New England Journal of Medicine, the LEAP study was published, learning early about peanut allergy. Professor Gideon Lack and his team from King's College London tested a hypothesis. What if peanuts are given to children from an early age, starting from 4 to 11 months? What if, instead of avoiding, we habituate? And habituate specifically through paste, a soft form of peanut that is safe in consistency for an infant. The results were sensational. Children who regularly ate peanut products from infancy, in a group at high risk for allergies, showed 81% fewer cases of allergy development by 5 years of age, compared to those who did not eat peanuts. 81%. This is not a margin of error. This is a complete turnabout. The immune system, it turns out, is structured paradoxically. When it encounters peanut protein through the skin, for example, through tiny cracks in children with eczema, it perceives it as a threat and forms an allergic response. But when that same protein enters through the gastrointestinal tract at an early age, the immune system learns to tolerate it. Tolerance is formed through food, not through avoidance. This meant that the mass exclusion of peanut butter from children's diets in the 1990s and 2000s, done with the best of intentions, could itself have been the cause of the allergy increase. The ban spawned the problem it was trying to solve. Since then, the American Academy of Pediatrics has revised its recommendations. Today they sound like this. Introduce peanut products to children with a high risk of allergy as early as possible, with medical supervision, of course. But introduce them. Do not wait. Science turned intuition upside down, as it so often happens. Now about what happens in the jar. Chemically. Because peanut butter is not just ground peanuts, and the difference matters. Peanuts consist of approximately 48% fat. Half of this fat is oleic acid, the same one found in olive oil. This is a monounsaturated fat. It lowers the level of LDL, the bad cholesterol. Another roughly 30% is linoleic acid, a polyunsaturated omega-6 fatty acid. Natural peanut butter is quite good from the standpoint of its fat profile. Protein, about 25%, including a full set of essential amino acids, although methionine is a bit low. For a plant source, very decent. Magnesium, phosphorus, zinc, vitamin E, B vitamins. Peanuts are actually a nutritionally dense product, and the paste made from them is a concentrate of that density. But here is what happens when the paste is hydrogenated, as Rosefield discovered. During partial hydrogenation, unsaturated fats turn into trans fats. And trans fats are a completely different story. They do not merely raise LDL. They simultaneously lower HDL, good cholesterol, a double blow to the cardiovascular system. In 2015, the US FDA declared partially hydrogenated oils unsafe for consumption and effectively banned their use in the food industry starting in 2018. Most major peanut butter manufacturers managed to reformulate their recipes. Stabilization is now achieved through other methods, for example, by adding palm oil, which, by the way, gives rise to a new problem. Palm oil production is linked to the destruction of rainforests in Indonesia and Malaysia. One product, one jar of peanut butter, and behind it is a long chain of ecological and ethical questions. Natural peanut butter, the kind where there is precisely one ingredient, peanuts, separates. The oil floats to the top. This is not a defect. This is normal. This is real paste, alive, unstabilized, honest. You just need to stir it before consumption. The Aztecs managed this, and you will manage too. And right here, I want to say the main thing. Peanut butter is one of the few products whose history literally passes through the entire modern history of humanity. Through slavery, the peanut crossed the Atlantic in the holds of slave ships, and the paste made from it fed people who had no right to choose their food. Through wars, 2 world wars made it a mass product. Through science, Carver used it as a tool for an agronomical revolution in the post-war South. Through medicine, the allergy story turned our understanding of how immunity works upside down. Through industry, Rosefield showed that stabilizing a product is sometimes more important than inventing it. And through ecology, each generation finds a new dark side in this jar. Something about this paste attracts contradictions. It is simple, peanuts and salt. It is complex. Behind it stand 9,000 years of history, several patent wars, an immunological paradox, and planetary supply chains. It is cheap, and that is precisely why its history is so closely intertwined with the history of poverty, labor, and survival. Peanut butter was not invented by one person. It was invented by necessity. Again and again, in different forms, in different cultures, in different historical circumstances, people ground peanuts into a paste because it provided protein, calories, and satiety when there was nothing else. This is not a story of invention. This is a story of adaptation. And perhaps that is precisely why a jar of peanut butter sits on a shelf in kitchens all over the world. Not because it is trendy. Not because it is healthy in a strict dietary sense. But because somewhere in us lives the memory that it is reliable. It is survival. It is a cluster of calories and protein packed in glass or plastic that will go nowhere until you open the lid. 9,000 years. One jar. This was another dossier of the Culinary Archive. If you want the stories to continue, subscribe to the channel. Every week we open a new dossier. See you in the archive.